The Galactic Diplomatic Reconnaissance Corps maintained a strict policy of non-interference. This was not, as some might assume, a noble commitment to preserving the natural development of emerging civilizations. No. It was primarily a bureaucratic cost-saving measure. Interference was expensive, paperwork was complicated, and most emerging species managed to spectacularly self-destruct without any external assistance. Lieutenant Korax Veridian knew this policy intimately. He'd spent the last 17 standard cycles, roughly 42 human years, perfecting the art of observation without intervention. His species, the Meridian Collective, were masters of diplomatic subtlety. Where other galactic cultures might send massive battleships or launch elaborate first contact scenarios, the Meridians preferred microscopic observation drones and exceptionally detailed spreadsheets. His current assignment came with a file so thick it could have stopped a small meteorite. Project Terra Cognita Preliminary Assessment of Homo sapiens Potential. The title alone had taken 3 translation algorithms and a quantum computational matrix to parse correctly. Nara, his AI assistant, projected a holographic summary as Korax reviewed the mission parameters. The projected data was a mess of contradictions that would make a quantum physicist weep. Species classification: Homo sapiens. Technological level: primitive emerging. Threat assessment: uncertain, potentially hilarious. Recommended approach: maximum caution, minimum exposure. The human data streams were a particular challenge. Their information network, something they called the Internet, were 87% misinformation, 10% cat videos, and 3% actual useful content. Sorting through this digital chaos required more computational power than most galactic civilizations used to run entire planetary defense systems. Lieutenant Nara's melodic voice interrupted his thoughts. I've completed the preliminary linguistic analysis. Human communication continues to defy standard xenolinguistic models. Korax raised a tentacular appendage carefully disguised through holographic human-like projection technology. Elaborate. Nara's holographic interface flickered, displaying rapid linguistic breakdowns. Their language contains approximately 171,476 active words, with an estimated 47,000 considered obsolete. Moreover, they frequently communicate through what linguists term memes, visual representations that carry complex sociological and emotional information. They'd seen these memes. They were bewildering. Images of small furry creatures with text that seemed to have no logical connection to the visual representation. Apparently, this was considered a sophisticated form of communication. The Meridian Collective's initial reports on humans had been interesting. A species that had discovered nuclear technology within mere centuries of developing basic metallurgy. A civilization that could simultaneously develop quantum computing and argue about the color of a dress. A culture that produced both Shakespeare and reality television. They were, in a word, unpredictable. His specific mission targeted their military training infrastructure. Not because the Galactic Diplomatic Corps believed humans represented an immediate threat. No, it was more like watching a toddler play with advanced chemistry equipment, fascinating, potentially catastrophic, but mostly just entertaining. The United States Military Academy at West Point had been selected as the observation point. Preliminary data suggested it was a critical node in human military development. A place where young humans were transformed from individualistic teenagers into coordinated strategic assets. Nara's voice cut through his contemplation. Quantum camouflage protocols are active. Our vessel will be indistinguishable from standard atmospheric particulate matter. We are officially invisible. Korax allowed himself a slight tremor of anticipation. 17 cycles of diplomatic service had taught him that invisible was always a relative term, especially when humans were involved. Little did he know that his definition of invisible and the universe's definition were about to have a spectacular disagreement. West Point Military Academy looked nothing like the satellite imaging had suggested. Korax had expected a sterile, precisely organized facility. What he encountered was a bizarre blend of historical architecture, modern infrastructure, and what could only be described as organized chaos. Nara's holographic interface flickered with a series of rapid translations and contextual annotations. Cadet communication protocols detected. Recommendation: maintain human projection parameters at 98.7% accuracy. Korax's human disguise was a masterpiece of quantum holographic engineering. To any human observer, he appeared as Major Daniel Reynolds, a mid-career military instructor, sent for a special assessment program. His carefully constructed backstory included an impeccable service record, a slightly outdated haircut, and just enough bureaucratic boredom to blend seamlessly into the military ecosystem. The Academy's administrative building was a monument to architectural indecision. Neoclassical columns stood alongside modern glass facades, creating a visual representation of human cultural complexity. Korax noted how this architectural mishmash perfectly reflected human civilization, a constant negotiation between tradition and innovation. Lieutenant Reynolds reporting, he said to the administrative assistant, his translation implant working overtime to modulate his speech patterns to match human military communication protocols. The assistant, a human female in her late 40s with an expression that suggested she had seen every possible variation of military bureaucracy, barely looked up from her computer. Files are in order. Visitor badge is on the counter. Colonel Harris will meet you in Building 700 at 0900 hours. Korax's internal systems process the interaction. No unnecessary small talk, precise communication, efficient information transfer. Humans, at least in this institutional context, were remarkably direct. Nara's voice was a soft whisper in his auditory receptors. Fascinating. The human's communication style suggests a high-context institutional culture with minimal emotional engagement during professional interactions. The visitor badge was a primitive tracking device. To a human, it was a simple piece of plastic with a magnetic strip. To Korax's advanced sensory systems, it was a hilariously basic attempt at security that could be circumvented by a first-year Meridian cadet using nothing more than a quantum phase manipulator. Colonel Marcus Harris was everything a human military leader should be, and everything Korax had studied in countless diplomatic briefings. Tall, mid-50s, with salt and pepper hair, and the kind of muscular physique that suggested years of disciplined physical training. His handshake was firm, his eye contact directed a universal language of professional respect that transcended species. Major Reynolds Harris introduced himself. I understand you're here to conduct a special assessment of our training methodologies. Korax, as Reynolds responded with carefully calibrated military precision. Correct, sir. Comprehensive review of emerging training technologies and interdepartmental coordination strategies. What he didn't say, I am an alien diplomat trying to determine whether your species represents a potential galactic threat or just an elaborate comedy routine. The tour began in the main quad, an open space that seemed designed to simultaneously impress visitors and break the spirit of young cadets. Rows of meticulously maintained buildings surrounded a central area where groups of young humans in identical gray uniforms moved with a synchronicity that was both impressive and slightly unsettling. Our training philosophy, Colonel Harris explained, is about developing adaptive leadership. We don't just train soldiers, we train problem solvers. If only he knew how problematic human problem-solving could be, Korax thought. A group of cadets ran past, carrying what appeared to be an improbably large rubber chicken as part of some incomprehensible training exercise. Nara's translation matrix went into overdrive, attempting to contextualize the scene. Preliminary analysis suggests this is either a team-building exercise or an elaborate practical joke, Nara reported. Probability is currently split 52/48. Korax allowed himself the slightest tremor of what might, in Meridian physiology, be considered amusement. Humans were going to be far more interesting than any preliminary report had suggested. Little did he know how right he was and how thoroughly he was about to be surprised. The first training exercise challenged everything Korax thought he knew about military preparation. What humans called a leadership challenge looked, to any rational observer, like a controlled psychological breakdown designed to test the absolute limits of human sanity. Cadets stood before an enormous wall approximately 4.5 meters high with an assortment of seemingly random objects. Logs, ropes, what appeared to be a deflated inflatable dinosaur, a single rubber boot, a megaphone with questionable structural integrity. Obstacle course Alpha, Colonel Harris explained, tests adaptive problem-solving and team coordination. Nara's computational matrix was working overtime. Probability of successful navigation 37.6%. Probability of hilarious failure 62.4%. The objective was simple: get the entire team over the wall, using only the provided materials. What followed was less a military exercise and more a masterclass in organized chaos. One cadet, a lanky individual with red hair and freckles, looked at the materials, then at the wall, then back at the materials. His expression suggested he was simultaneously calculating quantum mechanics and planning an elaborate practical joke. Cadet Thompson Harris said, "Your team's approach." Thompson grinned. The kind of grin that, in more advanced civilizations, would immediately trigger extensive psychological evaluations. "We're going to use the dinosaur," he declared with absolute confidence. Korax's translation implant momentarily short-circuited. The probability matrices in his cognitive systems began performing what could only be described as a computational panic dance. The next 10 minutes were a masterpiece of improvisational engineering that would have made most galactic research institutions weep with a combination of horror and respect. The inflatable dinosaur somehow became a critical structural component in a human-powered climbing mechanism that defied every known law of physics and military training doctrine. Nara's running commentary was a mixture of statistical analysis and barely concealed excitement. Structural integrity impossible. Logical progression nonsensical. Probability of success statistically zero. Actual outcome probable hilarity. They did it. Not just successfully, but with a level of creative madness that made Korax question everything he knew about tactical training. The next exercise was even more bewildering. What humans called communication challenge involved teams solving complex problems while intentionally limiting verbal communication. Some team members wore noise-canceling headphones. Others were blindfolded. One team member was required to communicate using only interpretive dance and hand signals. This Colonel Harris said with the kind of serious expression that suggested he saw nothing unusual about this scenario. Prepares our cadets for high-stress, communication-compromised environments. Korax's internal translator worked frantically. High-stress environments apparently meant situations where normal communication becomes a surreal performance art. The dance-based communication team was particularly fascinating. Their leader communicated complex tactical instructions through what could generously be described as a cross between ballet and extreme interpretive mime. Other team members not only understood these instructions but executed them with precision. Nara's analysis was succinct. Humans appear to have developed a communication method that simultaneously defies and transcends traditional linguistic parameters. By lunch, Korax had compiled enough observational data to fill 17 standard galactic research volumes. Humans weren't just unpredictable, they were unpredictability personified. The cafeteria was another revelation. What other species would transform a nutritional intake area into a complex social ecosystem with its own unwritten rules and intricate hierarchies? Cadets moved with a choreography that seemed part military precision, part elaborate social dance. Dietary intake and social interaction are simultaneously occurring, Nara observed. Efficiency questionable. Complexity unprecedented. Korax watched a group of cadets engage in what appeared to be a complex negotiation involving something called trading pudding cups, a transaction that seemed to involve more diplomatic nuance than most interstellar peace treaties. One thing became devastatingly clear: humans were not just a species to be observed. They were a species that demanded to be understood, if such a thing was even possible. And Lieutenant Korax Veridian was beginning to suspect that understanding humans might be the most impossible and entertaining task in the known universe. The scenario was innocuously titled Advanced Tactical Improvisation Exercise to Korax. It looked like controlled madness designed to test the absolute limits of human cognitive flexibility. The training area resembled a complex three-dimensional puzzle, a massive indoor environment constructed to simulate multiple potential conflict scenarios. Urban terrain, mountain landscape, desert environment, all compressed into a single mind-bending training space. Colonel Harris's explanation was maddeningly casual. We evaluate how our cadets adapt to rapidly changing environmental and tactical challenges. No plan survives first contact with reality, so we teach them to think beyond standard protocols. Nara's computational matrix was working overtime. Probability of predictable outcome 3.7%. Probability of spectacular improvisational intervention 96.3%. The exercise began with what seemed like a straightforward scenario. A simulated humanitarian crisis, a compromised communication network, limited resources, multiple competing objectives. The kind of complex problem that would reduce most military units to bureaucratic paralysis. Cadet Elena Rodriguez took point. She was not what Korax's preliminary research would have suggested as a typical military leader. Small in stature, quick movements, an expression that suggested she was simultaneously solving a complex mathematical equation and planning an elaborate practical joke. Her team consisted of 7 other cadets, each seemingly selected to represent the most diverse set of skills and personalities possible. If chaos theory could assemble a military team, this would be its masterpiece. The first phase went exactly as predicted by standard tactical models, which meant, of course, that everything immediately went wrong. Simulated communication networks collapsed. Resource allocations became impossible. The environment shifted, mountains became urban landscapes. Desert terrain transformed into dense forest regions. Most military units would have frozen, requested additional instructions, waited for hierarchical confirmation. Rodriguez's team did something else entirely. They didn't just adapt. They reimagined the entire scenario. Nara's real-time analysis became a stream of increasingly bewildered computational observations. Tactical deviation from standard protocol 427%. Problem-solving approach quantum improvisational. Probability matrices completely irrelevant. What Korax witnessed was not just problem-solving. It was problem reconstruction. When standard communication failed, they developed an entirely new communication protocol using a combination of hand signals, improvised radio frequencies, and what appeared to be an elaborate system of rhythmic tapping that resembled a cross between Morse code and interpretive dance. Their resource allocation became a masterpiece of creative mathematics. Limited medical supplies? They developed a triage system that would make most xenobiological research teams weep with joy. No transportation? They literally redesigned their existing equipment into mobile support platforms. At one point, Cadet Rodriguez used a standard military-issue thermal blanket, 2 communication devices, and what appeared to be a partially consumed energy bar to create a makeshift signal booster that extended their communication range by 300%. Colonel Harris watched with the calm of someone who had seen this before. But Korax detected the slightest hint of pride. Not just in the successful completion of the exercise, but in the spectacular way these humans had completely dismantled every known tactical model. Humans don't just solve problems, Harris said quietly. They fundamentally reimagine what's possible. Nara's final computational summary was a masterpiece of understatement. Recommendation: reassess entire galactic threat assessment matrix. Humans are not a potential threat. They are an existential variable that defies mathematical modeling. Korax felt something his species rarely experienced. Something close to genuine, profound respect. The universe, he realized, had just become significantly more interesting. When an alien officer's tour of a human military academy sparked a galaxy-wide panic. The transmission of Lieutenant Korax Veridian's report took precisely 3.7 standard galactic minutes to propagate through the Diplomatic Reconnaissance Corps quantum communication network. By the 3.8th minute, the first signs of panic began to emerge. Normally, diplomatic reports were about as exciting as watching quantum particles perform synchronized swimming. This was different. Nara's encryption protocols compressed the report into a data packet that would make most communication systems weep. But the content? Pure existential terror. The opening paragraph alone was enough to trigger multiple bureaucratic meltdowns. Preliminary assessment: humans are not a potential threat. Humans are an unpredictable variable that fundamentally challenges our understanding of strategic evolution. The Trilaxian High Council was the first to receive the full report. Their response was immediate and spectacular. 3 of their 12 governing members spontaneously molted a biological response to extreme stress that hadn't been documented in 700 cycles. The remaining 9 entered what could generously be described as a collective nervous breakdown. They create solutions where solutions should not exist, Korax's report proclaimed. They transform limitation into opportunity with a level of creativity that defies mathematical modeling. The quantum diplomatic relay began to light up like a catastrophic neural network experiencing simultaneous orgasm and existential crisis. The Meridian Central Intelligence Hub, typically a model of computational calm, started running so many simultaneous probability scenarios that several senior analysts had to be physically restrained from attempting to manually recalibrate the entire galactic threat assessment matrix. Ambassador Zrelnek of the Quantum Concordance stammered through an emergency transmission. They used an energy bar as a communication device enhancement. An energy bar. The Archean Defensive Coordination Council went into complete lockdown. Their threat assessment teams worked for 72 continuous hours, subsisting on stimulant compounds and increasingly hysterical theoretical modeling. Their conclusions were unanimous, and terrifying humans were not just unpredictable, they were fundamentally uncontainable. The report detailed how human military cadets transformed seemingly random objects into precision problem-solving tools, how they developed communication systems that resembled performance art more than traditional tactical coordination, how they viewed limitations not as obstacles, but as invitation for creative reimagination. One section, in particular, caused widespread panic. Observation: human military training does not teach compliance. It teaches creative defiance as a strategic advantage. The Galactic Threat Assessment Committee, a body so conservative that they considered breathing in potentially aggressive act, dissolved into complete chaos. They don't just think outside the box, one senior analyst screamed during an emergency session. They don't even recognize the box exists. Diplomatic channels began implementing emergency protocols. Defensive fleet movements were initiated. Research teams were assembled. Entire bureaucratic divisions were tasked with understanding this new, terrifying variable called human potential. The most alarming part: humans remained completely unaware of the galactic panic they had induced. Lieutenant Korax Veridian, still embedded at West Point, continued his observations with the calm of someone who had just discovered the universe's most fascinating mathematical equation. Nara's final computational summary captured the moment perfectly. Recommendation: observe. Do not engage. Humans are not a threat to be contained. They are a phenomenon to be understood. The galaxy held its collective breath. 2 weeks after submitting his report, Lieutenant Korax Veridian found himself in a situation that perfectly encapsulated human unpredictability. He was eating lunch with Colonel Harris, a meal that Nara categorized as nutritional intake with complex social negotiation parameters. The cafeteria buzzed with the typical controlled chaos of military academy dining. "Interesting report you're working on," Harris said, cutting into what humans called a mystery meat, a culinary concept that would require centuries of xenogastronomic research to comprehend. Korax, still maintaining his Major Daniel Reynolds persona, responded with carefully calibrated human military precision. "Standard assessment protocols, sir." "Standard. Right." Meanwhile, across multiple star systems, entire civilizations were redesigning their defensive strategies, diplomatic protocols, and fundamental understanding of evolutionary potential, all based on his observations of a single military training exercise. The Trilaxian High Council had implemented what they called human contingency protocols, a series of defensive and diplomatic strategies so convoluted that their own bureaucrats couldn't fully explain them. They had essentially created a complex system designed to be incomprehensible to potential human interference. Which, ironically, was exactly the kind of overthinking humans would find hilarious. The quantum diplomatic relay continued to buzz with increasingly bizarre theories. Some proposed that humans were a secret evolutionary experiment. Others suggested they were a form of biological chaos algorithm designed to disrupt standard galactic development models. Nara's ongoing analysis was a masterpiece of computational bewilderment. Humans continue to defy predictive modeling, the AI reported. Current probability matrices suggest a 73.6% chance that any given human solution will be simultaneously brilliant and completely insane. Cadet Elena Rodriguez, the tactical prodigy from the exercise that started this galactic panic, remained blissfully unaware of the diplomatic storm she had inadvertently created. She was probably solving another impossibly complex problem using nothing more than creativity, determination, and what appeared to be an alarming amount of caffeine. Colonel Harris finished his mystery meat and looked at Korax with an expression that suggested he knew far more than he was letting on. "Interesting times," Harris said. Not a question. Not quite a statement. Korax felt something close to what humans might call a gut feeling, though his species communicated complex emotional states through carefully modulated quantum resonance, not digestive intuition. Something told him this was just the beginning. The galaxy had been put on notice. Humans were not just a species to be observed. They were a variable that would reshape everything. And Lieutenant Korax Veridian had a front-row seat to the most fascinating show in the universe. Nara's final computational summary captured the moment perfectly. Recommendation: continue observation. Prepare for inevitable chaos. Humans are coming.